Well, the biggest news story of the local elections was the Green Wave. And it's no surprise with a global wave of climate activism taking place. You've got kids walking out of school going on strike. You've got leading climate campaigners like Greta Thunberg calling for a general strike. There's a huge amount of climate radicalism out there. And to be honest, the Green Party was going to benefit from this. Even though they are not representative of this movement, the Green Party is the first port of call for people who are beginning to worry about the effects of climate change. And there are divisions within the Green Party. There are some people in the Green Party who think coalition with Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil will somehow help in the fight against the business interests that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael represent. But there are left-wing Greens, people like Saoirse McHugh, who said she'd quit the Green Party if they went into coalition with the establishment. You see, this wave of green activism, this fight to save the future, it can win. But it can only win if we cast aside coalitions with the establishment and turn towards fighting for a socialist future alongside the massive working class people. George Monbiot, in a recent article, argued that we need an alternative to capitalism. He rightly argues that the problem we face is not a variant of capitalism. Or is it financialisation that's the problem? Is it neoliberalism? No, it's the capitalist system itself. The statement the capitalist system has failed and is failing stands in its own right. You don't need to provide an alternative to state that fact clearly. When people say nothing else will work, well, let's be clear. What we're doing right now does not work. And in a way, it's a form of intellectual pessimism to say nothing else will work. It's like we're on a runaway train heading towards a cliff and nobody can even imagine turning on the brakes. But I'd go further than George Monbiot. Because there is an alternative. And 100 years ago, it was commonplace for working class people, whether they were supporters of the Bolsheviks in Russia or the Labour Party in Britain, to say that some form of socialism was the alternative. You see, one of the greatest victories that Thatcher and the subsequent wave of neoliberalism achieved was to convince us that there is no alternative. They shut down any discussion of alternative societies. Any alternative way of living was demonised. And they inculcated in us and trained us to think in a pessimistic way. But people will say, defenders of the system will say, if you've got an alternative, show me where it works. Socialism, show me one country where socialism works. And at face value, doesn't that seem like a good argument? But it's stupid. Let's go back 150, 200 years to a time when women hadn't got a vote in any country in the world. Would the same person then say to you, show me a country where women have the vote? Because you couldn't. But guess what? Women knew that they were entitled to rights and were going to rightly keep fighting for them. Or let's go back a little bit further, where slavery of other human beings was universal. And some people stand up and say, and the slaves would stand up and say, we want an end to slavery. And the clever person and defender of the system of slavery would say, show me a place where slavery has been brought to an end. But you couldn't, because slavery hadn't been ended yet. So this show me argument is actually an argument against any advance that's ever been made by humanity. Any new invention is ruled out of order because you have to show it before you've created it. And in fact, even if you did show an alternative, even if you did show this person an alternative society where everything was worked out, they'd mobilise their armies and fight tooth and nail to destroy it because it's a danger to their own system. Look at the embargoes they put on countries that go down a different path. The show me where it works argument is an argument for us to stay in the caves, to submit to the pessimism of the there is no alternative Thatcherite argument. It's an argument to shut down progress and protect the status quo. You can't imagine a world without corporate power. Poor you. But even if we don't call that alternative socialism, if we say, well, what are the requirements of an alternative that would be green, satisfy the needs of the many, and save us from climate extinction? Well, the first thing is it needs to be planned. We need to plan production. Capitalism is a system of accumulation for the sake of accumulation. Everybody's competing with everybody and they're all trying to fill their pockets with as much profits as possible. Single-use plastics is an example of the stupid nature of an unplanned economy. You see, if we had a planned economy and we all worked together, cleaning a metal spoon would seem much easier than digging oil out of the ground, turning it into plastic and making billions of single-use plastic spoons. But because the fast food outlets who serve you the food and the companies that make the plastic spoons are separate companies, all trying to sell their product and not giving a damn about the consequences of their product, you end up with a situation where the world is flooded with single-use plastics. But in any rational society, that would make no sense. And there's already lots of planning right now under capitalism, but it takes place at the behest of corporations. Tesco have to deliver food to every one of their outlets all across the country. Thousands of trucks, all coordinated to get milk to a shelf at the right time. All coordinated from a computer hub, all subordinate to a plan. And that plan works like clockwork most of the time. But the people who construct that plan and the workers working in this vast corporation answer to a bunch of CEOs who probably haven't even a clue how the plan works themselves, but they profit from it. Socialism is about taking the planning that already goes on in corporate enterprises and applying it to society as a whole, but making that plan democratically voted on by the people who live in society. Or defenders of the system and those conservative Greens who want to save capitalism while claiming they're going to save the environment say you can decouple good capitalism from bad capitalism. That our economies in the West now are service economies. They're less about the consumption of resources. But this is just Starbucks propaganda. The corporations would love you to believe that everything just happens on a computer screen, while the clothing corporations are getting clothes made by poor workers in Bangladesh in sweatshops. Or you walk into Starbucks and you go, oh look, this is all service jobs now. Yeah, but who made the coffee machine? And who harvested the coffee? A few weeks ago, there was a paper published by a guy called Jason Hickel and another guy called Georgios Kallis. And they just said if you look at the 21st century, decoupling just is not happening. In fact, the use of the planet's resources is accelerating as the corporations seek to maximise their profits. So green growth is an illusion. The idea that the entire economy just takes place on a computer screen is an illusion. And even if General Motors in the USA or in Europe employs less workers, as technology advances, each worker mobilises more machinery and they put out as many cars, they consume as much metal, rubber and plastic. The absolute decrease in the amount of workers isn't indicative of the amount of raw materials that each worker can use up in the service of General Motors. We all inhabit the ashtray world of the corporations. It's what Naomi Klein called externalities. They shove the costs of their production onto society as a whole. But the corporations have always done that. And then when they dump pollution, that's an externality. The state has to clean it up. Society takes the burden of people dying of illnesses that they shouldn't be dying of. But now the externality, the cost of corporate production is the entire planet. A new report came out last week saying all human society will collapse by 2050. That's it. We're done for if we don't stop corporate capitalism. Oh, but maybe the state will rein them in. Maybe we can go into coalition with Fianna Fáil and maybe the state will rein them in. We're living in a period of the captured state. Our states are run by the corporations. They serve the interests of the corporations. The top civil servants, the top judges, the top police brass, they're all from the same class as the people who run the corporations. They will defend the corporations tooth and nail. The corporate lobbyists have more chance of persuading a politician of a policy than ordinary people do. You can't rely on the captured state to bring about an end to climate change. Of course, we should try and force them to give us this or that reform, but you can't reform away the whole system and the dynamic of the system. And there's only one force in society capable of bringing down the captured state, of taking over production and of making it democratic, and that's the working class. The people who work in the factories and offices are the people who can take over those factories and offices. They're the people who can participate in democratic planning and who know what they're talking about because they're rooted in the economy. So when Greta Thunberg calls for general strike, calls for working class people to unite with environmentalists and shut the economy down, I say yes, great, brilliant, because that's one step further down the road of working class people realising that they can take the economy into their hands whenever they want. They just need the confidence and the willpower and the imagination to think that they are the alternative.